Welcome everybody. Guten Morgen, Selamat sore, good evening. My name is Caroline Brendel from Goethe-Institut Bandung. We're very happy to host the event series, The City in Between, Reflections and Outlooks on Urban Informality, stemming from the virtual exhibition Designing with Informality in Bandung. Today, a project by Institut Technologie Bandung, University of Melbourne and Universität Stuttgart. In late 2019, students from the three universities came together in a travel-in studio to learn more about informal urban developments and to explore how to initiate a more inclusive planning along the Cikapundung riverscape. The observations and design works were supposed to come back to Bandung in form of an exhibition this year. Due to COVID-19, the exhibition was shifted to the digital space. And now for 2 days, we highlight this exhibition in a 2-panel event. After a virtual tour and a closer insight into the different design proposals yesterday, today we want to take a look at the topic from a more current and different perspective. The leading professors of the project discuss post-pandemic conditions of informality, sustainability, and resilience with renowned Indonesian-based urbanists and artists. And they shed light on the challenges and also the question if and what we can learn from the resilience of kampung communities during COVID-19. Thank you so much to my colleagues Lukman and Seno for the technical coordination of this event. Dear audience, please use the chat for any questions and comments you might have. Our moderator for this event is Dr. Wing Rahayu. He's Vice Rector for Partnership and Entrepreneurship, as well as Senior Lecturer of Architecture at the Universitas Islam Indonesia in Yogyakarta. He's an urbanist and an expert for informality and inclusive urbanism. His doctorate thesis dealt with kampung development, with particular reference to kampung in the city of Yogyakarta. Wing, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Good afternoon, good evening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the panel discussions. The City in Between, Reflections and Outlooks on Urban Informality. As Caroline have introduced me to you all, I'm Wing Raharjo. I'll be your moderator for this second panel. And we are going to discuss about post-pandemic urbanism, reflections on informality, sustainability, and resilience of Indonesian cities. As you all know, the global pandemic situation has in many ways exposed the landscape of inequality in cities around the world, particularly in terms of access of urban amenities, open green space, and affordable housing. At the same time, many kampung communities in Indonesia have demonstrated their resilience and ability to adapt to the challenging situations, while the formal cities continue to benefit from the flexibility and reliability of the informal economic sector. In response to those issues, I'm happy to welcome 8 presenters who are going to share their thoughts on how urban informality operates during these pandemic situations. The first presenter is Dr. Tisna Sanjaya. He is an artist and a leader of Imah Budaya Cikondewa. It's a cultural center in Bandung. Pak Tisna is also a senior lecturer at the Institute of Technology Bandung. Today, Pak Tisna is going to share his experience in revitalization of culture and community empowerment by means of environmental art. Again, if you have any questions, please kindly write them in the comment section. So without further ado, let's welcome Pak Tisna. Silakan Pak Tisna.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much, Pak Win. So I will go directly to present my work. Can you see this? Yes, we can, but it is still blocked by gray area. If you can see this, and I will go on with my story. Okay, just continue with your story. This is one of my work during the lockdown of ITB, and also with all my other activities during this pandemic. However, I do not give up. I continue with my explorations. Although I used to work in studio with my machine that I always have to work are not available, are not accessible for me for the time being. But I imagine that our body is a machine. This body with the soul, with the sense, with the creativity, and I believe that I don't have to depend on materials from the stores, from the shops, but the nature provides us with such materials, like materials that you can see here. As part of my research together with Professor David Yadi from Geologies in ITB. This is Gunung Tidul, is a quiet place far from the urban area. This is one of my recommendations for the post-COVID-19 activity, that the materials, the medium, and all activities, not just in art, but in other activities, we need to start think something new, that we do not only depend on what we have in the current industries, but we can start to work with the nature around us. And here I work with some cloves, with some spices that I bring from home and put them together. And this is where a river used to run here, but then now it is dried. The name, it was Cisaar River in Sumedang, and I work together with the geologists from ITB to look for the artifacts of the people of Sumedang, collaborating with the local people. And this is the situations that we had before the pandemic. The previous one was the video about what happened after the pandemic. But we know that pandemic has been there, but the culture is also there. So this is what I do with this body print, with all the materials. This is the ritual that I use. My art is my prayer, that I hope this is beneficial, because this is the area in Sumedang is quite mystical, but hopefully that we do not destroy the nature, but the work will be benefits for the human beings and also for the environment. So here I chant some prayers to try to implement some. So this is sendiri semua. This is an art that has a direct impact to the community. So here I plant some trees, so it's easy, and it also has a pedagogical value, has a good impact to the community.
Terus kudu dijaga kan cai tanya. Lamun tidak ada pohon, gimana caina kumaha? Banjir. Ya kan? Ya pokoknya mah kalian anak-anak harus menjaga air ya. Jangan buang sampah sembarangan ya. Jangan buang sampah sembarangan. Dari utara ini teh sepanjang sungai ini teh banyak sekali musola, gereja, pusat-pusat pendidikan di sini tuh. Yang harusnya dengan air tuh ada hubungan, tapi ini lihat, kalau banjir dari utara tuh kotorna, dibuang segala macam ke sini. Nah, lihat. Coba bandingkan dengan air ini. Air yang ada di pusat kebudayaan Sigonewah ini. Tuh, Sandi
Pak
berwudu.
Tisna.
Mr. Tisna,
Air indah sekali.
I think some part of your video cannot be seen. Your video is blocked. Yes, we can see something, but the center part of the video is blocked by a gray box. I think this is related to the speed of the video or the speed of the internet. But so we can only see like 50% of the whole videos. But the core is, there are two things that I want to share. There are two things. Number one, that the art, okay, that was a symbolic activities because of the pandemic. That number two, art can serve as a symbol. And then number two, art, the work that I did in Smoa can have a direct benefit to the people. So these two things, as a symbol, but also something that can give benefits. So this is what I would like to us to implement also in our activities in education, in terms of what the media that we use, the curriculum that we use, and especially also we have to understand that we can see a lot of things in abundance that can be beneficial for us from the nature. Not to destroy them, but the nature really show us that there are things that we can do. That so in Sugamewa, the water that I showed, that was something that I recommended directly to the universities, that to inspire people that the art can grow, that the art is like a water that flows, that the art is also our lives, our daily activities. That is what our art is all about. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pak Tisna.
Later on, we can replay the video if someone can help him to, fix the middle part of the video. Right. The next presenters are Dr. Amanda Ahmadi and Dr. Sintu Singa. Mandy and Sid are both senior lecturers at Melbourne School of Design, University of Melbourne, Australia. Well, initially, Mandy is going to talk about the emerging virtual and spatial tactics of kampung communities in Indonesian cities, while Sid will be talking about the synergy between the global virtual and real public space in Thailand that operates through public food pantry called Pantry of Happiness. Over to you, Mandy and Sid.
Terima kasih Pak Wing, thank you. So this is a joint presentation. In a sense, Sid and I have been reflecting on the future of informality following the pandemic experience. So the title of my presentation is Kampungization of Indonesian Cities, Emerging Virtual and Spatial Tactics. I think many of you who follow the experience in Indonesia, you know well how Indonesia is known for its relaxed attitudes towards regulation, reality, and risk. And Indonesia remains true to its culture through the ongoing pandemic. The general looseness of governance can be observed across the nation, starting from the very stubborn kind of acceptance of the pandemic up to the actual attempt to deal with the new pandemic, COVID-19 normal. So it started with a denial. Well, the first case was only reported quite late, 2nd of March. And there is a consistency in the enforcement of the response. And there's clear anxiety among the upper middle class, the working class, and overall kind of an acceptance and disobedience and resilience among the working class and urban poor, simply because they have no choice to work and to earn a living. They have to pretty much be on the street. But towards the end, you can see that public disobedience could be seen across class lines. So both the middle upper class and the working and the lower income groups demonstrate their general disobedience against the PSBB. But what we can see is also with the looseness of governance, what you can see as a response to that is this emerging practice to compensate the lack of guidance, the lack of, I guess, support infrastructure to deal with the pandemic. And through the process, we can see how crucial is informal economy in providing a safety net to make sure that the economy continue to unfold and goods can be distributed despite of the shutdown of the formal system. And I think to some extent, this informal practice, this fluidity, in a sense, have affected the middle upper class. They have re-embraced this spontaneity, informality through emergence of informal home-based economy, delivery system, and collective neighborhood shopping. And this is a number of conversation emerging in what Indonesia is a prolific social media user, where different residential neighborhood organize a system to do kind of a everyday grocery in a different house in charge of a certain commodity. And through the process, there is a clear intersection between social class, because they really need each other to I guess, retain a certain normalcy. To some extent, that the language of informality is embraced in the formal domain of e-commerce to really harness and cultivate on this spirit of you can say kampungan, the spirit of spontaneity and resilience. The notion of tukang sayur, nyayur, which is referring to street vendor selling fresh vegetable, can be seen emerging through e-commerce. To some extent, that the Indonesian diaspora bring that practice in places such as Melbourne. At the early stage of the harsh lockdown in Melbourne, the social WhatsApp group among Indonesian community is dominated by this promotion of delivery. So you never will have any instances that you struggle to find Indonesian food ingredients in Melbourne. And the kampung also show a fascinating resilience in the absence of social security and kind of support from the formal health infrastructure, that they come up with their own system of protecting themselves from the spread of the COVID-19 by establishing their own quarantine and a new hygiene practice and so on. And what is interesting is in some small cities in Indonesia, we can see emerging spatial tactics where the formal space are allowed to be occupied by informal activities. This is where the traditional market, in traditional market, most of the traders are employed informally, and here in the city, they were given an opportunity to utilize the space, the street, the formal space of the formal civic space of the city to allow them to continue to operate while socially distancing. The question that I would like to pose at the end is, The fact that informality and formality seems to come together through the pandemic in virtual space and in some instance in actual space, the question that I would like to pose is whether this will change the way we imagine cities in Indonesia, whether the physical border between the formal and informal city will loosen up, learning from the clear interdependence between the formal and informal sector, and the realization that informality and the real safety net that has saved Indonesian economy is their social capital. At that point, I would like to hand over to my colleague Sid to talk about again the notion of social capital in the context of Thailand.
Good evening from Melbourne, everyone. I'm continuing on from themes raised by Mandy, and the title of my presentation is Expanding Social Capital in the Thai Pantry of Happiness, and it focuses specifically on the soft lockdown in Thailand in around May and June. So the COVID-19 pandemic brutally exposed society's weaknesses and revealed strengths. Earlier, when the public spaces and others have been perceived as diseased and feared conduits of COVID-19, the Thai Pantry of Happiness phenomenon provides an example of simultaneous synergy between the global, virtual, and real public spaces. The Pantry of Happiness is simply a cupboard placed in public where anyone can put in food for those in need. The initiative started as a middle-class proposal in Facebook that became a social experiment to ascertain the urban poor's public's selfishness versus collective mindedness. Independent of actual results, it went viral in all 76 provinces of the country, spreading through social media as in the real public spaces of cities and towns. Videos captured by smartphones and security cameras alike flood virtual spaces, capturing the good, the bad, the ugly, both confirming and dispelling class stereotypes. The phenomenon's success can be attributed to limits of governmentality and is rooted in two types of social capital expenditures. One is the practice of middle-class merit-making. This has basis on millennials' old tradition of alms giving to monks, performed daily in public spaces. In fact, in contemporarily intensified urbanized areas, temples have an excess of food to the point that it quickly performed the role of community pantry at the outset of the pandemic. The second practice is of social capital that manifests in lower middle class and poor informal urbanity that sustains the social commercial role of the streets as spaces of opportunities in good times and of social support during the pandemic. Yet this concurrently exposed social economic prejudices. For the urban poor, the public spaces of the street are spaces of livelihoods. In bad times, even before the pandemic, the streets can be relied upon for help and assistance. In contrast, the middle classes have been self-segregating in the air-conditioned private spaces and views the streets, real and virtual, with distrust as messy, dirty, and in need of reorganization. Pantry of Happiness success is further reinforced when the formal sectors quickly catches on, with private corporations and government agencies erecting their own pantries with all the formal pomp and public promotions to boot. This reveals conceptual and cultural slippages embedded in language, and notions of patronage or social capital manifest specifically both in meaning and social spatially. Like an accordion, formal-informal ebbs and flows, expands and contracts in times and circumstances. Social capital is analogous to the pantry. It is about trust, give and take, at scale and beyond. To conclude, I pose the questions. Are there lessons in how to build and mine social capital? Can this be done by synergizing the virtual and real public spaces? I suggest that informal urbanism brings diverse stakeholders in direct interaction with each other, enriching social capital, as demonstrated by the Pantry of Happiness phenomenon through the pandemic's disruption, social media cast the network that captures and relinks middle-class netizens to the streets. This could be an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mandy and Sid, for the very insightful presentations. And now the next presentation will be delivered by Dr. Budi Faisal and Pak Asep Darmana. Both are faculty members at the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, Institute of Technology, Bandung. Pak Budi and Pak Asep will talk about the challenge in managing relationship between social and spatial systems in kampung kota during the COVID pandemic. Over to you, Pak Budi and Pak Asep.
Thank you. Okay, Pawi.
Thank you.
Okay, so everybody can see our screen, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So
very clear.
Yeah. Over to Pak Budi.
Okay. Asep and I will present lesson learned from the informal neighborhood during the pandemic. Next, please. Fundamentally, a river within a city is not solely belongs to its citizen, but also belongs to the world as it flows and discharges into the ocean. This is also applicable to Cikapundung River, which would flow to Citarum River and finally discharge it to the Java Sea. Therefore, to take care of the ecological condition of Cikapundung River is the responsibility of all citizens, particularly those who dwell along the Cikapundung River bank. In the context of the pandemic, it even more. The river ecological equality even more important to mitigate the spreading of virus and bacteria. Our joint studio here is aimed to exercise ideas on how social life of the kampung kota community well-being could go hand in hand with Cikapundung River ecological quality. Next, please. There are two systems in kampung kota, as we know, spatial system and social system. Before the COVID outbreak, Kampung Kota social system is already very cohesive. Their togetherness has been proven throughout many difficulties, such as monetary crisis in 1998, frequent natural disasters, etc. Therefore, social distancing is not relevant for Kampung Kota neighborhood. A very limited space in Kampung Kota creates a strong social bond among the community. They don't have enough space to use their private house to do their daily activities. Therefore, they use their narrow alley as their shared living space for gossiping, taking care of their pet, relaxing, playing football, dishwashing, etc. Therefore, during the COVID outbreak, physical distancing is a luxury. During the pandemic, our government has partial lockdown policy, which is to work from home, stay at home, but it is almost impossible for the community, leaving them very difficult choice, either going out and getting infected or stay at home and starving to death. We have data and numbers from research conducted by UCL and our local architect community, architect or comunitas, that perfectly illustrate how would the local responded. On the left side, we could see the conditions of the house. One lady said, I was told to stay at home to be safe, but my house is just like this. Am I really safe at home? On the right side, to my surprise, the community perception of their home support and capacity is amazing. 38% highly support the condition. Another 38% also poor support. Only 22% does not support their condition. Next, please. As I said before, that the living space, the alley, the narrow alley is their shared living space. So people can do whatever it is together. Like here, the lady chatting each other, asking about their condition and so forth. On the right side, I'm very proud of Indonesian people. During the COVID, they do local or limited crowdfunding. For instance, in Jakarta, they do buying rice during the COVID outbreak. Although the rice is brought from Central Java, but for the people of Jakarta. Let me hand it over to Pak Asep.
Moving on, we will show a quick snapshots from the sites and key highlights of each area. We take this opportunity to revisit the sites of the joint studio and observe how the community cope with the pandemics. Here in the upstreams, the Teras Cikapundung, open public spaces are becoming more relevant. Despite the common understanding of the threatening virus infection, most people are lacking proper health protocols. Moving down to midstream between Ciwok and Taman Sari area, we visited both the outer commercial area and the inner part of the residential. Open public spaces are preferable than commercial area during pandemics. Within the resident area, however, daily activities are almost as normal. Going further down to Braga, the downstream, there are crowd here as well. But as we can see here, visually the crowd is more compliant to the health protocol. It seems that different target market of the area correlates with compliance on health protocols. Moving into the inner parts of Braga, we visited Kampung Braga. Here we can see a demolished building being reused as a kiosk. The challenging economic situation due to the pandemic has motivated the community to utilize and optimize what they have. Going further in, closer to the Cikapundung River, we will see the high-density neighborhood. In the pictures, we could see how various activities are sharing spaces. Even pets are sharing space within the public alley. Here we can see iguana just laying down on the alley. It seems that the extended living space is inevitable. Social distancing is irrelevant. However, the closeness and togetherness has become significant social capital to cope with difficulties. Finally, for the closing, I will pass it back to Pak Budi.
Some key to takeaways. We learn from Kampung Kota neighborhood that they are more responsive in terms of togetherness, empathy, helping each other, etc. Compared to formal living neighborhood, for example, the gated community. Their strong social cohesion and resilience during the pandemic has been proven effective. Therefore, it potentially to be replicated, quote unquote, in more wider community. We can learn from their acceptance to the condition, most likely because they do not have any choice, contribute to their psychological resilience in facing many difficulties compared to the less acceptance middle high class community, most likely due to more choices and well-informed, leading to their more quote unquote complaining tendency, and finally it might decrease their immunity. Despite our good intention to improve the people Kampung Kota life quality, we should never forget that the river is belong to all citizens of Bandung, all citizens of Indonesia, and ultimately to all global citizens. Therefore, all of us share responsibility to keep improving the river ecological quality by utilizing the inherent social capital in the kampung along the river, and it has to be accessible to public. Thank you. I give it back to Pak Win.
Thank you very much, Pak Budi and Pak Asif, for the interesting presentation. I agree with the last paragraph. You know, we have to be responsible for the river, and I think there's many effort has been done in many cities in order to keep up that initiative. The next presenter is architect Yasin Mostanjidi and Professor Astrid Ley. Both are faculty members at the University of Stuttgart in Germany. Yasin and Astrid will introduce two case studies of community collaborative actions in South Africa and Germany. Yasin and Astrid, the screen is yours.
Thanks, Win Harjaro. And a very good morning from Stuttgart as well. And I thought of starting our presentation with giving you a little glimpse on how our winter term here in Stuttgart started. This was a month ago, just basically a week before the second lockdown. And also here we had to keep social distancing protocol. At the same time, we wanted our first semester students to really get to know one another, because architecture, urban design, it really lives off that students work in groups, that they build teams. And this is at the moment all basically being hindered in this situation. And I think our colleagues in Indonesia and Australia can also refer to that. So this is just a little glimpse on how we did this. And the second image is from our IOSD graduation in October, where we somehow wanted to make possible that the students at least celebrate that they have managed their master, even if they have worked basically in different home countries in the lockdown to make this possible. But what I want to talk about today, I was during the start of the pandemic in my research sabbatical in Southern Africa. I was supposed to visit different countries, South Africa, Mozambique, Zambia, Namibia. Eventually it didn't happen. I spent 6 weeks in South Africa, of which 3 weeks were spent in a very hard lockdown. South Africa introduced one of the hardest lockdowns worldwide when Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, announced it in mid-March this year. And we had spent 2018 with students in Cape Town. And for me, it was interesting, how do these communities react to the experience of the pandemic? At the time, we were looking actually on how does the Sustainable Development Goals become relevant for urban development, because there's a particular goal related to cities which highlights the importance also of inclusion. And now you must understand that cities like Cape Town are some of the most unequal cities worldwide. And we were interested in how far the use of public space in communities for urban food gardening doesn't only become an issue of food security, but also an issue of strengthening social cohesion. And here you see one of these initiatives. It is called Abalimi Bezekaya, which translates into farmers of the home, which operate in the Cape Flats. These are the disadvantaged neighborhoods of Cape Town, around 20 to 30 kilometers outside of the city center. These initiatives were founded during apartheid time in the 1980s as a way to ensure a livelihood in this situation. And nowadays they become really also instruments of empowerment and social resilience. And it was interesting to see during the lockdown what a central role these kinds of community initiatives have. These neighborhoods situated so far outside of the inner city are basically located in so-called food deserts. So these are areas which have hardly any formal supply through supermarkets for ensuring food security. On the other hand, the movement of people was strongly hindered. People were supposed to stay home, and this was even controlled by the military. At the time of the lockdown, the government actually didn't include such initiatives as part of ensuring food security. And these organizations played a central role for advocating that they become included as a part of a strategy to meet the needs of the people. You can show the next image. And so here you see an image of when we were there in 2018, and really also in the South African context, they operate with a similar, not gotong royong, but the term being used is Ubuntu, which translates into we are what we are because of others. We have to keep together. And here these farmers basically become centers of education to show how do you actually grow seeds in a very difficult environment and how you can make a living of that. And next slide, please. Now, during the lockdown, they, on the one hand, supplied fresh vegetables to the community, but what they also did, and that you see here on the image, they distributed training material of how to grow your own seedlings. They distributed for free seedlings to community members. And this became a strong backbone towards the food supply in basically disadvantaged communities. And here I hand over to Yassine.
Yeah. Thank you, Astrid. Yeah, we're just going to move back to Europe, where informality has different manifestations. Well, as you know, Europe has been the epicenter of the pandemic for months, and Germany was not spared. While the number of deaths and cases has been relatively lower than other European countries, COVID-19 has set off macroeconomic earthquakes throughout the country. Between the waving curves and repeated lockdown, the impact of the pandemic on communities and our immediate surroundings is very tangible, as businesses of all verticals, whether it's retail, hospitality, or entertainment, are suffering under social distancing and lockdown quarantines. Many of our favorite spots, from cafes to bakeries to cinemas, as you see in the picture, here that's from a cinema in Stuttgart, they may not make it out of the other side. However, the pandemic has also triggered an impressive grassroots solidarity and informal support for communities and businesses alike. We have seen the return of the neighborhood as a crucial scale for community action and informal initiatives to support those suffering under the lockdown. We have also seen the emergence of new digital initiatives conceived and facilitated by neighborhood networks, youth, volunteers, and students offering services ranging from supporting the elderly, offering childcare, food delivery, fixing computers, or helping with household cleaning tasks. One of the major online platforms in Germany is Nebenan, which translates literally into close by. It is Germany's largest social network for neighbors. This initiative took different dimensions as the response to the pandemic came, and has offered, along with other online platforms, an alternative digital public space for neighbors to socialize and support each other. It has also been providing a great help for local businesses by offering a platform for donations and vouchers from local shops. Within a few days, this initiative could raise an impressive 1.2 million euros to support local shops. So while the digital sphere has been impressive in mobilizing communities and neighborhoods, there are still many questions regarding the gaps it creates between those who have access to these platforms and those who don't. This is not only a matter of technical access, but also of ethnic and language barriers that might marginalize certain members of the community. We are also interested in understanding how this mobilization in the digital world might crystallize in the physical space. In our institute, we are running a few studios and seminars that look at those social and spatial dynamics with the aim to analyze online and offline adaptation techniques and design strategies within these neighborhoods to achieve a certain level of community resilience. Yeah, so that was just a snapshot from what's going on in Stuttgart.
Thank you very much, Yasin and Astrid. Very insightful presentations. Last but not least, I'm going to invite Kamil Muhammad to deliver his presentation on how architects facilitate the community participation in kampung development. I believe this is part of Kamil works as an architect and co-founder of Architectural Sans Frontier Indonesia. Over to you, Kamil.
Thank you, Badwin. I'll share my screen. I hope everyone can see this.
Yes, very clear.
Hello everyone. Selamat sore. My name is Kamil, and thank you for having me here. I'd like to share with you my experience along with ASF, or Architecture Sans Frontiers, in working with the residents of a kampung in Jakarta called Kampung Kunir, in proposing for a vision, an alternative vision to what the government has previously offered for their future settlement. We can see that through works by authors like the celebrated Pramudia Anantatur, that we could glimpse at the nuances of how kampungs are embodied in Jakarta's spatial organizations. But the contestation and divide between the formal planning process and the slow and organically growing kampungs are often quite apparent. And this is even more pronounced when we compare the Rencana Indo Kota, or the City Master Plan of 1965, to the Perda, or the City Regulations #1 in 2013. The greens on the left in 1965, they are unmapped territories. They are a combination of open green spaces, of cemeteries and rural areas. They are seemingly undistinguishable from one another, but they really are settlements. They are the kampungs of Jakarta, and in 2013 plan, as you can see, many have been incorporated into districts, with new ones forming and filling in leftover spaces. The threat of eviction, however, persists. So as a response, kampungs such as Aquarium, Bukit Duri, Kunir, and several others have organized to propose an alternative vision for future development of what their houses could be. In staking their place, it opens up questions such as, what will kampungs be like in the future? How to maintain this sense of continuity of historic kampung livelihood, and what the future development is going to be like. And how we can form productive relationships between the state, the settlements, and also the private sectors. For the past 3 years, Architecture Sans Frontiers Indonesia, along with GRMK and the Urban Food Consortium, has worked together with the residents of Kampung Kunir through pendampingan, or continuous assistance in developing a vision for their future settlement. This is us, ASF, along with some residents of Kampung Kunir. Kampung Kunir itself is a mature and small kampung located in Kota Tua. It was evicted about 5 years ago, and is currently in the process of proposing new settlements. Clearly, this eviction creates a loss of evidence because all the houses have been fully demolished. And while it seemed apparent in the beginning that one of the end products was going to be an architectural design, much time was spent in trying to understand how Kampung Kunir organizes, its politics, its socio-economic relations with Kota Tua. So it forced us to consider kampung not as a homogeneous entity that we can design from afar, but also comprised of aspiring individuals and collectives, where we may have to come in and understand how the kampung works rhythmically. So this loss of evidence made room for a long process of memory recollections. The redrawing, the remapping, and speculating through many drawings that residents design themselves, the residents drew themselves of past houses and the area. They help us to understand and see Kunir much more as a multidimensionally, as an assemblage, and it has gone beyond a simple narrative of a kampung that was evicted. So through that processes over 3 years, the design process itself was then continuing this pattern of individual critical processes of interrogating activities. So the residents drew what their previous houses were like, and they imagined what their future houses were like. What the architects do is architects come in to assist in translating between these spaces and interrogating and helped the residents to interrogate what changed and what could benefit from new knowledges that they gain over the years, working with many other organizations. So architecture with this is much less about a specific design process from afar, but it becomes much more about tools that we use to interrogate and analyze the material phenomena of how a neighborhood functions. This is a picture where one of the residents, Bahari, showing his idea of what the future houses will be like to fellow residents and architects. This is quite a traditional kind of pinup that we see often in an architecture studio at school. But how does this work in larger scale? Particularly with the challenge of living in and post-COVID. How do we maintain that social bond that has formed through the process that we've done so far? What has the pandemic revealed about our digital infrastructure, or the lack thereof, particularly in Kampung Kota? I think these are some of the questions that we continually face and particularly this year. So I'll stop here, and hopefully we can explore more on this topic and its theme during discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamil, for sharing your amazing hands-on experience in working with the community. Again, if you all have questions, please write them down in the comments area. So 8 presenters have already delivered the quick presentations. Again, thank you very much indeed, but it's quite challenging for me to wrap them all. But basically, all the presentations suggest that urban informality is a global phenomenon. It is part of our everyday life that we as scholars interested in the productions of built forms need to keep on observing it to get a better understanding on how informality influence the survival of cities, particularly in the global south. The presentations also suggest that we can engage ourselves with the field of urban informality through various means. Pak Tisna, for example, has long been using visual art as a medium to engage himself with the capacity building of kampung community. Amanda Ahmadi and Sintu Singha, as well as Yasin Ostanjidi and Professor Astrid Ley, see the informality as, I guess, a kind of a agile system in coping with the ongoing COVID pandemic. Meanwhile, Pak Budi Faisal and Pak Asep Darmanak found the sense of togetherness as key factors in assuring the survival of kampung communities in this pandemic situations. Finally, the work of Kamil Muhammad shows how sense of togetherness can be further developed through the role of architects as facilitators in participatory design process. Well, I guess that's all I can quickly wrap from the presentation of the 8 distinguished speakers. Now, let's move to the question and answer sessions. According to the scenario, before we look at the questions from the audience, I would like to start with some key questions set up in the topic descriptions. So I would like to the panelists to respond. It doesn't have to be all of you, right? So I'm going to start with the first questions. Have the pandemic generated critical reflections on the landscape of inequality embodied within the constructing urban conditions of Indonesian cities? Do I have to translate it in Bahasa Indonesia for Pak Tisna? Pertanyaan pertama, Pak Tisna. Okay, jadi, so who is going to respond? The first question or comments, perhaps, from your experience? This is the questions, the key questions that we already, I think, promote in the informations of this webinar. Anyone?
I think Kamil and, oh, Astrid.
Sorry, okay, Astrid, please. Can you, okay,
well,
thank you.
Maybe more to the topic of inequality, and then maybe Kamil can reflect this in the Indonesian context. But what we see in many of the global south cities is a high degree of inequality. And the question is, in the situation of the pandemic, this inequality in a way becomes even more, becomes more experienced. In the case of South Africa, for instance, from one day to the other, many people were outside of any income opportunity. Yeah, they were sent home, stay at home. and all their informal livelihood opportunities were cut off. Yeah, so it presented a high degree of vulnerability. On the other hand, and I think the presentation of Pak Budi made this very apparent, yeah, this togetherness they could still experience in their neighborhoods, whereas the middle class, which had to retreat in their gated communities, were maybe more cut off in that sense. Yeah, so they experienced that inequality in a different way during the pandemic.
Thank you, Astrid. Kamil, you want to say something? I thought you...
Oh, sorry. You repeat the question again?
No, it's the first question. Have the pandemic generated the critical reflections on landscape of inequality embodied within the constructing urban condition of Indonesian cities? So this is the default questions in our key questions in the information that we publish in the website.
Okay. So during the month of April and May, ASF were doing this very small research with the residents of Kampung, particularly looking at how do kampungs deal directly with the pandemic, specifically the PSBB or the social restriction. And as you know, during that time, a lot of people are pushed to not work, and a lot of economic activities cannot take place. So what happens was that there was this hashtag of the WH, work from home, the WFH. And it was kind of curious how do we determine home at that stage? And what that revealed was that through a lot of conversations with the residents, and it was all done online, which was also a very new thing for us to organize with the residents, was that the logic of home being a place where there's that sense of domesticity was really put in a different context when we talk about kampung. It's no longer home equals house, but home was really about the neighborhood level. And I remember at one point, JRMK, Jaringan Rakyat Miskin Kota, or the network of the urban poor, was proposing that if there was going to be a lockdown, maybe do a lockdown at the scale of kampungs, so that there is a certain level of economic activities and social activities that may still take place as if you are in a house, which you cannot do when you are simply put, in a very small house. It's very typical of kampung. Hence the adage that the street is the public living room in kampung that we so often heard. And I think this was quite revealing, at least to me personally, in how we see houses when we were working on designing houses in kampungs, that really it's much less about proposing a single unit, but it's really a collection and an arrangement of domestic spaces in a settlement, in a neighborhood. Another thing that I think also came up was the question of the digital infrastructure that I sort of brought up at the end of my presentation. And it just revealed that we have very slow internet and a pricey one at that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Kamil. I think if you're a teacher or lecturer, you'll see, the inequality is really apparent in our daily work. Sometimes we have to communicate with internet with with students from Papua, for instance, or remote area, and they don't have access, and yeah, they cannot get the same information as the students here in Java, for instance. I guess that's part of also the inequality that we experience today at the moment. I may go back to the first question, but later on, if you have any response to this, but because of the time, I'm going to also invite the audience to check whether the audience is, send the questions. So I'm going to move to the second one. have the pandemic broadened up the envisioning of future cities in Indonesia, including a rethinking of relationship between density and access to open green space and riverscapes? Anyone want to respond?
Pak Asep? I think
Pak Asep.
Yeah. Okay. I think in my view, the pandemic is somewhat a catalyst, if we may call it, to what we aim for ideals, urban living, or what we might envision before during the normal time. I think what I'm trying to say is, say if a public space is it's always critical to have a public space within a neighborhood, but now during the pandemics, it's not just critical, it's even more relevant, and it's a basic necessity. It will be part of the mitigation of the pandemic that we have to have a public space. That's for instance. Another thing is, one trend that we see in Indonesia is how the bicycle community is emerging during the pandemics. And I think to a certain extent it's a good way that how we encourage people to like do more bike commuting to their works, to any other places. That was the plan or the vision that we would have back in the days when the normal, but maybe not many people encouraged to do that. But now in pandemic, it's sort of speed up the what do you say, the encouragement to do the bike. I think on the silver lining, there's a good side in a way for the pandemic to be a catalyst on what we envision during the normal days on the urban living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Asep. Any other comments on the second questions?
Yeah, if I can just make a comparison with the experience of Melbourne. During the very long lockdown we experienced, Sid and I, we just regained our freedom in the last 2 weeks after, we were in stage 4 of disaster since this early August, and work from home, everything's homeschooling on top of that, so it's quite a crazy juggle. And through that process, I think in Melbourne, it really exposed landscape of inequality, in particular access to open green space. You can imagine if you live in an area where there is no access to open green space, there is no escape. And I interact with a lot of my students who lived in student housing in Melbourne, and they really feel like they're in prison. And similar experience can be observed in public housing, high-rise public housing and social housing in Melbourne. And there's a whole range of debate call for rethinking of these high-density environments that pretty much has created a detachment between domesticity and access to open green space. To some extent, there is, Sid can tap onto this response. There is a golf course situated in our suburb, but through the lockdown, the golf club was not operating, and people, the residents who live in the area, literally make a hole on the fence, and then they start occupying this large open green space that we never realized exists in our suburb. And we, at the same time, we were, this reality for me is somehow quite different from what happened in Indonesia, because life seems to operate almost normal through the COVID era. And sometimes I felt that while Melbourne start kind of, moving forwards to rethink, the better solution for public housing, which is the high-rise housing, it seems that the perception in Indonesia has not changed, because life is pretty much the same. And there's, in many cases of kampung eviction, the proposed model is still this old-fashioned high-rise public housing. And we've seen that solution, that seemingly perfect solution, has created all sort of issues here in Melbourne or in many other Western countries, where that model is clearly outdated and create an isolation.
Yeah, and I think what Mandy and Asif and Camille has been discussing also relates back to inequity, and not just between or within a country, but it's also between countries, like rich countries, poor countries, and the notion of hard lockdown is relates to affordability. I think only the wealthy countries can actually afford that.
Right.
Less wealthy countries, I think soft lockdown is the most they can go to. And what Asif was also talking about, a new nascent bike culture that also relates to class within Bandung. I think he's referring to the middle class. And this is in contrast to what Camille was suggesting, in which the kampung residents seem to have some sort of solution already, when if you see the notion of home not as individual houses, but as the neighborhood unit, which is also presented in Pak Budi's presentation, where it's the living room, and I think what we're also talking about is this that maybe the software is more important than the hardware here. And so the software of kampung, living, or what Camille was saying, the design tool is used to interrogate how a neighborhood works. So it's actually trying to discover that software that can then be applied in building the city. Yeah.
And I think to tap on what Yasin presented earlier, and the emerging informality in Stuttgart is fascinating. Again, it's similar to this notion of neighborhood unit, where you start kind of rethinking this threshold between dwelling units and this neighborhood close by. It's kind of this is something that we realize we rely on our immediate social community.
So the big question is, what is the code to gotong royong? What is the code to Ubuntu? We want to unpack that code.
Neighborhood.
Gotong royong, yeah. I don't know. Gotong royong can actually say. Oh, sorry. There's a. Okay, Astrid.
Please.
Yes,
please.
I think this is a very important discussion we're having now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear.
Because I think if we think about what implications does that mean for the future of our cities, I think what Asep was saying, this catalytic event can go in two directions. The one is what we see, pop-up bike lanes, the experimentation of maybe more sustainable modes of transport. But I think what it goes back to is actually individuality. I don't want to sit in a public bus or in a tram or so, captured with other people who could infect me. So I'm doing individual ways of transport. And what we see in Stuttgart, it's both going either bicycles, or people use also the car more, because and they try to avoid public transport. And what I fear is that the implications of the pandemic is a questioning of our ideals of the compact city. It's not so much maybe with regards of asking for more public green space, because we don't even know if we're allowed to use them. what I see is there's a certain middle class reorientation towards the suburbs, towards having your own private garden. And I think this could be very detrimental for what implications does that mean. And secondly, we also experience that many companies realize that the home office actually works not so bad. So maybe in future, or they're already doing that, they say not all of our employees do need to have an office space in a office building. And we work with a home office and just create less office space. So there's a number of other implications we need to look at in this regard.
Yeah, I think next year will be. I mean, I'm still struggling to think about next year how I manage the university, for instance. You know, because if the coming back of students to university and with the COVID protocol still going on, we need more space, right, in the classroom. But so we may, you know, we still try to find an option. All right, I guess part of the discussion already responds to the third questions, but I would like to emphasize more, if you have any response to the third questions, have the resilience and social capital showcased by some of the historical urban kampung in cities such as Bandung, Yogyakarta, and other cities, and in Southeast Asia, broaden up public conversation about social diversity as a component of sustainable urban future in the country. Any response to the third question?
I think Pak Budi wanted to say something.
Pak Budi?
Could you repeat the question?
Pak Budi first, then Pak Tisna.
Could you please repeat the question again, Pak Wing?
Okay, have the resilience and social capital showcased by some of the historical urban kampung in cities such as Bandung, Yogyakarta, and other cities in Southeast Asia, broaden up public conversation about social diversity as a component of sustainable urban future in the country.
I don't know if I can comprehend clearly the question.
Yeah, it's
yeah. I think I would like to
more on ketahanan dan modal sosial, perhaps, if I may translate it to bahasa Indonesia.
I'd like to respond to the third questions and as well as the second questions, Pak Wing.
Okay.
I'd like to underline what Sid say. How could we unveil the key to gotong royong? First of all, I'm still very proud of Indonesian people during this pandemic. I think it is still proven that our social capital is very strong in Indonesia. During the Kurban, Idul Kurban, the people who give Kurban, what do you say that in English? Yeah, Kurban.
It's Kurban. Yeah, it's a sacrifice.
People who give Kurban like cow and lamb, it is 60% higher than last year. 60% higher than last year. That's the number. And there is one, I call it local champion in Cimahi, Kota Cimahi, just next to Bandung. I think on April or May, during that time, the people, it's so, what you call that? Yeah. The COVID is not that big, but people at that time is very disciplined. Nobody would like to go out, including myself. And during that time, there is one family in Kota Cimahi got affected by COVID-19. And then all their neighbors give them food, give them food. They make a schedule who is giving for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I think this social capital now is proven. It is more important than the hardware. So the software is very important for not only, I think, for Indonesia, I think also for more wealthier countries. Yeah, because wealthier countries, if individuality is more than social well-beings, yeah, then gotong royong, togetherness, I think also it's become a big problem. So I think what happened in Kampung Kota, it's a proof that actually the software is more important than hardware. So because I think in the very basic fundamental that we are a social well-being. We are social beings. Yes, we are a social being. And this is, I think, I'm also very, very sad, yeah, when there is one lady finally passed away. Yeah, I think on April or May. At that time, only partial lockdown, but then nobody gave her food, and finally after 3 days, she passed away. And so there is one. I think that,
not because of COVID.
No, because of food, because of starving, because of starving.
Oh my goodness.
And there is some junior high school students, and I think outside Java, yeah, he did a suicide because of internet, because of the weak signal. So I think equality is not only in technology. I think our government needs to be very careful when they do the school from home, yeah, using online curriculum. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in Indonesia, maybe the one in Java that can access very good signal of internet, but outside Java, it's very terrible. So then Indonesia need to be, yeah, the government, especially Minister of Education, need to be very careful in using online system. Online system means also need to transform the curriculum, not only just shifting the offline curriculum to online curriculum. We need also to transform the pedagogy. I don't know how to say that in English. Yeah, the way you teach the children, the students during COVID is really different. What happened is they just shifting the same curriculum from offline to online. Big problem. Not only one did the suicide, yeah, outside Java. There is some of the junior high school students did the suicide. So I think inequality in many things in Indonesia, in technology, in IT, in economy, of course, yeah. But I think the fundamental is if we have that social capital, I think we will have more empathy. I would like to use Pak Tisna's word. Yeah, the empathy is very important during this COVID pandemic, and the Kampung Kota inhabitants teach us a lot about this.
Excellent. Thank you, yeah. Pak Budi. Pak Tisna, it seems to me you want to say something. Ada yang ingin disampaikan, Pak?
Ya, Pak. Terima kasih. Saya orang kampung ya, jadi
I am someone from kampung. I love when people talk about kampung or talk about village. I am so happy being in kampung. Often though we are being acculturated with the in my kampung or ledeng. Ledeng is water. So it used to be a center of water. So the name of the place is such a meaning. So the name of my kampung is actually show the strength of my kampung. So ledeng, during this pandemic, we have a lot of people express this gratitude because we have religious people. So the Muslims, they are, and all from other religions, they have their own way of demonstrating their tolerance, such as on Friday evening, they also show the relation between these religious activities. So people of different religion, now they often come together to contribute and to donate for one another to those people who suffer because of pandemic. So you can really see that these values that you have talked about, the gotong royong, the togetherness, are also shown in my kampung. And what's also interesting is the tradition, just like in Braga. In Ledong, we have the gumblung art. This is an art when people play when you have either disaster or either you have something that is joyful. So they demonstrate by playing these small drums. And we have another one, which is Narwat, which is in the way to try to get more blessing. So to try to chase away the bad luck. We have that kind of ceremony also. So people do this ceremony to one another to help each other by conducting this type of ceremony. So they use the art to advocate. So they involve people with various art background, with various religious background. They come together, just like what we have like now in political situation in Indonesia right now. We know how difficult it was, right? But now with the art, they come together. These political differences, they forgot about this. They come together with the arts and then try to put things together and then try to help one another, purchasing food for one another. This is such a positive energy that we have in this country. That so some people, we know that yes, we have such a strong nature. We have gone through so many experiences. Yes, with this pandemic, we have to be more careful in our daily activity. But we know that we have this background and capital in our community. Yes.
Anyway, this highlights what Sid mentioned about the importance of strengthening the software. So Pak Tisna is talking about the influence of pandemic in the strengthening the togetherness and tolerance. People, and this also highlighted by Kamil Muhammad in the chat, that in some kampung there is an increase of donations during the first month of lockdown. So helping each other, it's really, we see this practice a very significant increase during the pandemic situation. Maybe, Mandy, if you can catch.
Yes, a very quick.
Tisna.
Yes, I have a quick comment and building on Pak Tisna reflection. And also relate to this notion of software and hardware. We know that the social capital, if we frame it as a software, is a really kind of amazing software. But perhaps there is a danger of separating the software from the hardware too much, because 21st century, the image economy valorize, worship the hardware, the middle class consciousness, and the urban development of cities in Indonesia will continue to worship certain urban image built through physical environments. So I'm just wondering whether we need to somehow spatialize and create a physical environments out of the social capital to kind of situate that in real space. There is, I think, a danger of social capital that operate virtually, especially in Indonesia, because virtually we can see that there is kind of a blur between class difference. You know, people just connect with anyone if they need some goods or service and what have you. They don't see who you are. But then you can see the physical environments of Indonesian cities. The hardware is so disjointed. So I guess, you know, how we can kind of strengthen the visibility of kampung as a spatial entity more so than its obvious social capital.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I guess we only have 4 more minutes.
I think
Yassine has something to say.
Yassine, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just
Last
want to
perhaps.
Yeah, I just want to share a concern, because there's a trend that we're seeing also a little bit globally in Germany and Morocco, everywhere, is also the erosion of trust in governments and institutions. Do we see that through protests in Morocco, for example, where the lockdown was also very, very harsh? Then you have a huge chunk of the population which relies on informal economy, was kind of left in a limbo because all the markets were supposed to close and the supermarkets are the only ones that were supposed to open. But anyways, all these decisions that left a big part of the society kind of lost without an income, and sometimes also the chaotic management of governments is somehow leading to an erosion of trust. And I'm wondering what that would mean later on when we're talking about public participation and when the pandemic is over. How can you actually work, how the institutions can work with communities if that trust is gone? And that can translate in both ways. It can translate into maybe enforcement and strengthening of that social capital and community, but it can also lead to kind of a chaotic situation. And I think that's quite a rising danger. And Astrid, yeah, we see it everywhere now, the huge discussion in Germany about like really people going like hardcore against every decision that, to deal with this situation. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Yassine. I guess time is almost up, so I cannot handle more questions. I mean, in fact, there's no questions from the audience, and but the discussion is very fruitful. So thank you very much for all the distinguished speakers and participants for the engagement in these events. And let's give a round of applause to all of us. Right. So it has been, before I give the screen to Caroline, well, I'd like to thank Goethe-Institut, University of Melbourne, Institute of Technology Bandung, and University of Stuttgart for involving me also in this rare event. For me, this is an event to update my knowledge on urban informality. So I hope this we can continue this event and you know, in a different topics, and I hope this kind of partnerships will continue in the future. So that's all for me. Again, thank you very much for your engagements, and I'll give the screen to Caroline Brendel for the final remarks. Over to you, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wing. And thank you so much to all panelists today for the presentations and the discussions on the implications and consequences of COVID-19 on urban informality in different contexts in Indonesia, in Australia, South Africa, and Germany. And the very interesting and fruitful discussions and insights on notions of togetherness, individuality, inequality, social capital, and trust that was mentioned. Thank you so much for the partnership in the 2 panel discussions in the last 2 days on the city in between. A big thank you also goes out to our moderators and guests. I have learned a lot. You can rewatch this talk and also our panel event from yesterday on envisioning the city in between through the lens of art and design on our YouTube channel. And now I say auf Wiedersehen, goodbye, and have a great day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.